Have you ever walked into a room and felt like no one saw you? Like you were both present and invisible at the same time? She didn't have a date. She didn't know anyone. She was seated at the very back table next to an empty chair, as if the world had quietly decided she didn't belong in the center of anything. Maggie Whitmore was 41, a librarian from a small town who'd spent most of her life learning how to take up as little space as possible. But what happens when the person who takes the empty chair isn't just any guest? What if he's the groom's best friend and also happens to be one of the most powerful tech CEOs in the country? Now imagine you're Maggie. Would you stay at that table safe in the shadows, or would you dare to be seen, knowing that love from someone like him could also come with a cost? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about visibility, choice, and the quiet courage it takes to believe you're worth loving. Stay with us. This story might just remind you of the moment someone saw you, or the moment you wish they had. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every story sees the heart behind the silence. It wasn't the kind of wedding Margaret Whitmore would usually attend. The kind with a string quartet tucked in a corner of a rented vineyard, champagne flutes clinking before noon, and guests wearing linen suits that had probably never seen a wrinkle. But when her second cousin Paige insisted she come, "You need to get out." Maggie, just come for the ceremony. At least, she didn't know how to say no. Now, standing just beyond the patio doors, Maggie tugged at the hem of her dress for the fifth time. It was a soft gray cotton blend she'd bought 2 summers ago for her niece's piano recital. Comfortable, familiar, and hopelessly out of place among the silk gowns and tailored cocktail dresses around her. She adjusted her glasses and gave the place a once-over. Rows of white chairs stretched across a manicured lawn, framed by twinkling lights and climbing wisteria. The ceremony had ended 20 minutes ago. People were drifting toward the reception tent, laughing, sipping, leaning into one another as if the whole world made perfect sense. Maggie stayed back. She wasn't antisocial. At least, she didn't think she was. But this kind of social, where everyone had something clever to say, somewhere important to be, someone leaning in close, this had never been her world. She was content with her quiet routines in Charleston. She liked mornings at the library where she worked, the smell of old paper and polished wood, the familiarity of regular patrons who nodded hello without asking much. And she liked her solitude, most days. But standing there in the soft Oregon breeze, invisible among a crowd of glitter and laughter, she felt something more than loneliness. She felt exposed. Maybe I shouldn't have come, she thought, clenching the small strap of her purse in both hands. A voice called out behind her, "Whitmore, table 14, over by the east corner." She blinked, realizing the usher was talking to her. With a polite nod, she followed the man's gesture toward a far table, tucked near the catering area, partly blocked by a large floral arrangement. It wasn't hard to guess what table 14 was. Overflow. The people who were invited out of courtesy, not connection. She passed a table where a group of women in pastel chiffon clinked glasses, giggling over something one of them had shown on her phone. At another table, a couple in their 70s leaned toward each other in a quiet, private world. Every chair seemed full of easy company, except for the one next to hers. Maggie sat slowly, placing her clutch on the pristine white tablecloth. The chair beside her remained empty. She fiddled with the corner of the cloth napkin and stole glances at the other guests. Conversations flowed around her, like a river she'd never learned to swim in destination weddings in Italy. Real estate deals, second homes in Napa. The salad in front of her was beautifully plated. She picked at it half-heartedly. Why am I always the girl at the back table? A familiar ache rose in her chest, one she had learned to ignore years ago. It wasn't bitterness, not really, more like quiet resignation. Life had never made room for someone like her in the center of the room. And then, is this seat taken? The voice was low, smooth, like a song that sneaks in under your skin. Maggie looked up, startled. The man standing beside her was tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed dark hair and a classic black suit that fit like it had been made just for him. He offered a small, almost apologetic smile. I'm a last-minute reassignment. Hope that's okay. She blinked. Oh, yes. Please, have a seat. He pulled out the chair and sat with a practiced ease. Not hurried or theatrical, just calm, grounded. There was something quietly commanding about the way he occupied space without overtaking it. Maggie tried not to stare. He turned slightly toward her. I'm Sebastian Cole. There was no fanfare in the way he said it. She hesitated. Maggie. Whitmore. His smile deepened. Nice to meet you. Maggie Whitmore. And somehow, the way he said it made her name sound like it mattered. Sebastian settled into the chair beside Maggie, with a grace that didn't draw attention, but couldn't go unnoticed, either. He adjusted his cuff slightly, then glanced over at her, with a look that suggested curiosity more than courtesy. You okay? He asked. His voice soft but clear, somehow cutting through the chatter around them. Maggie blinked, not used to being the recipient of such direct concern, especially not from a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. She gave a quick smile, just trying not to look like I wandered in from the wrong event. He chuckled. You and me both. She tilted her head. You're not exactly the picture of underdressed. Sebastian looked down at his perfectly tailored suit, then shrugged. Well, the tux fits. Doesn't mean I feel like I belong in it. Maggie raised an eyebrow. That's hard to believe. He leaned back slightly, studying her with a calmness that made her want to fidget, but also lean in. You'd be surprised. These kinds of events, people wear masks. And I don't mean the glittery kind. She smirked. I wouldn't know. I don't get invited to many events where the napkins cost more than my weekly grocery bill. That made him laugh a real laugh. Warm. Slightly surprised. I like you already, he said. Maggie felt her cheeks flush. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked down at her salad. I'm pretty sure I'm the least interesting person at this table. Sebastian looked around. Tables got 5 hedge fund guys talking about golf and 3 women swapping vacation homes in Aspen. I'd say you're easily in the top 3. Maggie laughed in spite of herself. So, what brings you to table 14? He took a sip of water, then said, Friend of the groom? Sort of. College roommates. I was a last-minute switch. They needed someone to balance the table. She gestured toward the others. I think the balance is still off? Maybe. But then I sat down next to you. He said it simply. No wink, No hint of performance, just sincerity. The kind of sincerity that felt risky in a world full of polished small talk. She looked at him again, really looked. His suit might have been worth more than her car, but his eyes didn't shine with arrogance. They were green, steady, and if she wasn't imagining it, a little bit tired. So, she asked, do you always crash wedding tables and charm the quiet ones? He smiled. Only on Saturdays. They talked through the appetizer course. Nothing too heavy. Maggie told him about the library, how the town's internet went out every time it rained too hard, how kids still came in to check out dog-eared paperbacks. He listened, genuinely. He didn't interrupt. He asked questions that weren't just polite. He seemed to actually want to know. And when the main course arrived, he didn't glance at his phone once, not even when it buzzed 3 times in the span of 5 minutes. You can take that, she said, nodding toward his pocket. He shook his head. If it's important, they'll call back. If it's not, it can wait. She didn't say it aloud, but that simple statement stayed with her. How long had it been since someone made her feel like she was worth a full conversation? As the lights dimmed slightly, and the band struck up its first slow song, couples began to drift toward the dance floor. Maggie shifted in her seat, unsure whether she envied them or pitied them. Dancing had never been her thing, not because she didn't like it, but because it felt like something that belonged to other people. People more at ease in their skin. Sebastian must have noticed the look on her face. Would you dance with me? Her heart skipped. I should warn you, I have no rhythm, and a deep fear of public embarrassment. He grinned. Good thing I've got enough rhythm for both of us, and zero concern for judgment. She hesitated for a beat. Then, with a breath she didn't realize she was holding, she stood. The band played something old and beautiful. As they moved to the floor, Sebastian placed one hand gently on her waist, the other taking her hand without rush or pressure. And suddenly, it wasn't so scary. They didn't talk while they danced. Didn't need to. The music filled the spaces between them, and his presence solid. Calm gave her something to lean into. She didn't float. She didn't twirl. But she didn't stumble either. She let herself exist. After the song ended, they returned to their seats, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Sebastian leaned in, voice quieter than before. You know, Maggie Whitmore, you have a way of making this night feel different. Better. She looked at him. Really looked. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and glitter and the clinking of 2 fancy glassware, she let herself believe he meant it. They returned to their seats after the dance, a little flushed, a little surprised both at how natural it felt and how quickly it had passed. The rest of the table remained lost in conversations about investment portfolios and ski trips in Telluride. Maggie reached for her water, hoping the coolness would quiet the warmth still humming beneath her skin. Sebastian, sitting just beside her, leaned slightly toward her, not too close, just enough to speak without raising his voice. You weren't kidding about your rhythm, he said, a gentle teasing in his voice. She raised an eyebrow. That bad? He shook his head. That real? Most people fake their way through it. You didn't. She smiled, touched by how he made even a clumsy moment feel like something to be proud of. They talked more easily after that. The awkward edges had softened. replaced by a kind of unspoken understanding that neither of them was here to impress the other. And maybe that was what made the conversation so different from anything Maggie had experienced in years. "So, librarian," he asked. "Is that what you always wanted to be?" Maggie laughed. "No, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 6, a poet at 13, and a pastry chef somewhere in between. What happened? Life. Bills. A degree in English literature and no trust fund." She gave him a playful look. "I like books. I like quiet. I like the idea of helping people find stories that mean something to them." Sebastian nodded. "That sounds more meaningful than half the things I do." She tilted her head. "What do you do?" He paused, just long enough for her to notice. "I work with companies. Tech stuff. Mostly boring unless you like spreadsheets and innovation charts." "Is that your rehearsed dinner party version?" He grinned. "Maybe." She let it go. Something in his tone told her he wasn't hiding as much as protecting, like someone who'd learned to shield parts of himself not everyone needed to see. "You ever want to do something else?" she asked. He looked out toward the dance floor, where the bride and groom now moved slowly to a familiar melody. "Yeah," he said. "Sometimes I think about buying a small hardware store in a sleepy town, fixing things, selling nails, closing by 6. Maggie smiled. "You don't strike me as the hammer and nails type." He shrugged. "Everyone has a version of life they think might have been easier." The words hung between them, gentle but heavy. She understood that feeling more than she could say. The life that might have been, the choices you don't remember making until you realize they shaped everything. "I lost my mom last year," she said quietly. "Ovarian cancer. Came fast." Sebastian's expression shifted. No awkwardness, just quiet presence. "She loved wildflowers." Maggie continued. "The kind that grow in ditches and fields. She used to say they had more soul than store-bought bouquets. She sounds like someone I would have liked." Maggie smiled, but her eyes burned. "She would have told me not to sit back here alone. She would have said, 'Mags, you're not invisible unless you want to be. Smart woman.' She was." They sat with that, not trying to fix it, not changing the subject. Then, as if sensing the weight in her chest, Sebastian said, "Tell me about something that makes you feel alive." Maggie blinked. "That's specific." He nodded. "I ask that a lot, but only when I actually want to know the answer." She thought for a moment. There's a moment at the library, usually right after we open when everything's quiet. The sun hits the wooden floor just right. There's dust in the air and the smell of old paper. And someone walks in, usually a kid, looking for a book like it's a treasure map. Sebastian smiled, resting his chin lightly in his hand. "I like that. It's small." "No," he said. "It's real." Maggie swallowed hard. He wasn't looking at her like a man at a wedding, scouting for conversation. He was looking at her like she mattered. "You ever get tired of all this?" she asked. "The events, the parties, the roles?" He exhaled slowly, "More than I let on. And yet, here you are." He leaned back, glanced toward the crowd. "My friend asked me to stand up for him today. He's a good man, deserves a good memory." I couldn't say no, but I knew I'd need a break. "So you sat with the librarian and found the only person here who isn't selling something." Maggie flushed again. "Maybe I'm selling silence. That might be exactly what I needed." The music changed, picking up tempo. The crowd got louder. Somewhere nearby, someone popped a bottle of champagne. Laughter echoed under the tent ceiling. But Maggie and Sebastian sat still. Then, just before dessert, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Not trying to be weird," he said, "but I've been carrying this quote with me for a while." He handed it to her. In careful handwriting, it read, "There is no greater gift than being truly seen by someone who expects nothing but your company." Maggie looked at it for a long time. "Who wrote this?" He smiled. "A woman I met once in Italy, on a train. We talked for 10 minutes. She wrote that on a napkin before she left. I've kept it ever since." She looked at him, heart catching in her throat. And for the first time that evening, she wasn't thinking about how she looked, what she wore, or how far her life was from his. She was just there, present, and seen. Maggie woke the next morning, still wearing the soft smile from last night. But it vanished the moment she opened her laptop. She hadn't meant to look him up. But after she got home, after brushing her teeth and folding her dress, and laying down in her small apartment with the smell of wisteria still clinging to her hair, curiosity had crept in like a quiet guest who didn't need permission to stay. She typed his name into the search bar, still unsure of the spelling. Sebastian Cole. Google did the rest. The first result was a Forbes profile. Sebastian Cole, the elusive CEO of Coltech, continues to defy industry norms with quiet dominance and understated elegance. Maggie froze. There were photos, red carpet galas, a cover story from Fast Company, candid shots with senators, fashion events, TEDx talks, estimated net worth $740 million. Her stomach tightened. The living room suddenly felt smaller, colder. Her morning coffee, untouched. It didn't make sense. The man she'd talked to, who danced like he had nowhere else to be, who listened when she talked about library shelves and dusty paperbacks, that man didn't look like the one smiling in a tux beside billionaires. Maggie scrolled further. Coltech, global software platforms, AI optimization systems, environmental tech, multiple foundations, and not a single mention of a partner. No public dating history, no scandal, no tabloid drama. He was clean, powerful, polished, untouchable. She shut the laptop, sat in silence. Why didn't he tell me? Why pretend to be ordinary if you're anything but? Her phone buzzed. A text. "Sebastian, good morning. Maggie. Any chance you're free for coffee today? I know a place that makes a mean cinnamon scone." She stared at the screen, then typed back, "Sure." Noon. The cafe was small, tucked between a plant nursery and a yarn shop in the quiet part of town. Wooden beams across the ceiling, chalkboard menus, sun filtering in through a dusty front window. He was already there when she arrived. No suit this time, just a soft gray sweater, dark jeans, and a calm expression that didn't quite match the storm in her chest. "You came," he said, standing. She nodded, sat, folded her hands, tried to keep her voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Sebastian didn't pretend to misunderstand. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly. "I wanted to. I almost did. But you were real. And I didn't want to lose that." Maggie stared at him. "You have articles written about you, buildings with your name on them. You sat next to me like you were just a guy at a wedding." He looked down at his coffee. "I am. Sometimes." A guy who gets tired, who forgets how to make small talk, who wants a night off from being a brand. You lied. I omitted. There's a difference. No, she said, her voice sharper now. There's not when it changes everything. He flinched, not visibly, but she felt it. Maggie, I've been doing this life for almost 20 years, and I've met thousands of people, investors, reporters, CEOs. Everyone wants something, and you think I don't. I think, he said gently, you wanted nothing but my company. That's rare? She didn't know what to say to that. The compliment felt too large, too fragile. I don't belong in your world, she whispered. Sebastian's gaze lifted to meet hers. His voice softened even more. Maybe my world's the one that doesn't belong. A silence stretched between them. She sipped her coffee lukewarm now. Bitter. I've spent most of my life making sure I don't stand out, she said. Making peace with quiet corners and background roles. And now, I feel like I've stepped into someone else's movie. You haven't, he said. You've stepped into mine. She looked away. Outside the window, a mother adjusted her toddler's hat while they crossed the street. A couple laughed over smoothies. Life moved on, indifferent to Maggie's spiraling thoughts. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. You don't have to do anything. Yes, I do. Because you're not just some guy I had a nice conversation with. You're Sebastian Cole. You're on magazine covers. You own airplanes. Sebastian, he chuckled. Only one, and I don't fly it myself. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? No, he said, instantly serious. I think it's overwhelming. I think it's more than I should have asked you to walk into. And I'm sorry for that. She nodded slowly, unsure what hurt more, the fact that he hadn't told her, or the fact that part of her still wanted to believe in who he'd been at that table. I should go, she said quietly, rising from her chair. He stood, too, but didn't stop her. Maggie, he said, voice low. If you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if there's even a small part of you that wants to find out what this could be, what we could be, then I'll wait. No pressure, no chase, just space. She didn't reply. The door chimed as she left. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel comforting. It felt unfinished. The silence in Maggie's apartment had changed. It used to feel peaceful, familiar. A cocoon where the noise of the world stayed politely outside the door. Now, it buzzed with too many unspoken questions. She moved around her space with mechanical rhythm, feeding the cat, folding laundry, restocking the tea drawer. But her mind kept circling the same point, like a restless hawk scanning for something it couldn't name. Sebastian Cole. She'd said his name out loud once that morning, just to hear what it sounded like. It didn't match the man who'd handed her a quote on a crumpled paper napkin. It sounded expensive, controlled, strategic. It sounded like someone who wasn't hers to keep. Claire Jensen, Maggie's closest friend since college, arrived that afternoon with a brown paper bag of lemon scones and no questions, at least not right away. They sat on Maggie's worn-out couch, steam rising from mismatched mugs, the kind only two people who'd shared decades of history could sit with in silence. Eventually, Claire spoke. So, the guy from the wedding. Maggie gave her a look. You Googled him, please? My thumbs were typing before I realized what I was doing. Maggie exhaled. It's a lot. Claire sipped. It is. He owns companies, has his own foundation. Flew in from Seattle on a private jet. Claire tilted her head, and Maggie's voice rose just a touch. And I work in a library where the heating system's from 1986, and I bring my own tea bags because the break room always runs out. Claire's eyes didn't flinch. He made you feel seen. Maggie stared into her mug. He did. Then don't punish him just because the world made you feel small. That landed like a pebble in her gut. She didn't answer. 2 days later, Maggie's phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Sebastian. It was her boss at the library, forwarding her a link with a half-curious, half-concerned subject line. This you Maggie clicked. A photo of her and Sebastian dancing at the wedding, taken at a flattering angle she didn't recognize, was now circulating on a gossip blog. The caption read, "Mystery woman steals attention of tech billionaire at Oregon wedding. Who is she?" There were guesses in the comments. Someone said she looked like a tech recruiter from LinkedIn. Another claimed she was a family friend from Montana. A few were crueler. She closed the tab. Her phone buzzed again this time, with a text from a former high school acquaintance she hadn't heard from in years. Is it true? Are you dating Sebastian Cole? Then another. And another. Maggie put her phone face down and sat very, very still. Somewhere across the city, in a sleek boardroom with glass walls and perfect air conditioning, Sebastian Cole stood at the head of a long conference table while his business partner, Daniel Harrington, flipped through a tablet. This is becoming a thing, Daniel said flatly. Sebastian didn't respond. You didn't prepare for this, Daniel asked. The press was going to find out the moment she stepped onto that dance floor. I wasn't thinking about optics, Sebastian replied. That's the problem. You're a public figure. We have pending partnerships, shareholder impressions. She's not a scandal. Daniel didn't flinch. She's not from our world either. And the story's already being shaped without your input. Sebastian leaned forward. Then let them talk. That's a luxury you can't afford. You think this ends with tabloid photos? What happens when people start questioning her background, her past, her intentions? Sebastian's jaw tightened. She's not that kind of person, Daniel sighed. You've known her, 10 days, long enough to know I trust her. Daniel folded his arms. That may be true. But does she trust you to stand beside her when the world starts watching that night? Maggie stood outside her apartment building, arms crossed tightly around her coat. The sky above Charleston had that heavy gray look that warned of rain. Her phone sat untouched in her pocket. She hadn't replied to Sebastian's last message, or the one before that. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that he might stop reaching out, or that he might not. The door opened behind her. Maggie. She turned. It was Sebastian. No suit, no entourage. Just him, in jeans, and a dark navy hoodie, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. I needed to see you, he said. She hesitated, then stepped aside so he could come in. They sat at her kitchen table. I'm sorry, he said. She stared at him. For what being who you are? He shook his head. For not giving you time to adjust. For throwing you into this without asking if you were ready. Maggie's voice was low. I'm not sure I am. I understand. She looked at him, really looked into eyes that, even now, held a kind of weariness beneath the charm. A man who had spent years being watched and had learned how to be seen without being known. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "I know. I don't want a spotlight." "Then we won't have one." "You can't promise that." He paused. "No, but I can promise I'll protect you from it the best I can. That I'll never ask you to be anyone other than who you are." She swallowed hard. "I don't know if I belong in your world." "You don't have to. Just belong with me." That cracked something open in her chest, but fear still sat stubbornly in her gut. "If I say yes to this, to you, it's not just about us anymore." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know, and I still want it." Maggie stared at their hands. His fingers were warm, steady. The rain finally came, gentle, steady, washing the windows in soft rhythms. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel like running. Maggie wasn't sure why she said yes. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Sebastian had looked at her across the kitchen table, as if she was the first person in years to see him without filters. Or maybe it was the silence after the rain, gentle, forgiving, like the world finally exhaled. The next morning, he picked her up in a car so ordinary it made her blink. No driver, no tinted windows, just Sebastian in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, his hair slightly tousled, like he hadn't bothered to perfect it. "Ready?" he asked. She hesitated at the curb, ready for what a weekend with no headlines, no expectations, no cell service. Her eyebrows lifted. "You're asking me to disappear with you." He smiled. "Only for 48 hours. We'll come back. I promise." And for reasons she couldn't explain, not even to herself, she opened the car door and got in. They drove north, windows down, wind tangling her hair. The road curved along stretches of pine forest, sunlight flickering through the trees like blinking stars. He didn't talk much, just let the radio hum beneath the sound of tires on gravel and the occasional bird call. It was the kind of silence Maggie liked, not awkward, not heavy, just comfortable. 2 hours later, they pulled into a clearing where a small cabin sat by a glassy lake, tucked beneath old-growth trees. No gates, no cameras, just a porch swing and a small wooden dock stretching out into still water. "This is yours," she asked, stepping out. Sebastian nodded. "Bought it 5 years ago. I needed a place to remember what quiet felt like." Inside, the cabin was rustic but warm. Worn leather chairs, books stacked beside a stone fireplace, mugs that didn't match. The windows faced the lake, and the scent of cedar and earth clung to the air. Maggie ran her hand along the wood-paneled wall. "It doesn't look like the home of a billionaire. That's because it isn't. It's the home of a man who sometimes forgets how to breathe." They spent the first evening cooking together. And by cooking, Maggie quickly learned Sebastian had the kitchen skills of a man who'd survived on catered dinners and takeout menus. He burned the garlic, used baking soda instead of cornstarch, dropped a pepper grinder into the pot. She laughed so hard her sides hurt. He took the teasing with grace, arms raised in surrender. "Chef, I am not good," she said, "because I was starting to worry you were too perfect." Sebastian looked at her, then really looked, and for a beat, his smile faltered. "I'm not even close." Later. They sat on the dock with their sad but edible pasta in mismatched bowls, feet dangling just above the surface of the lake. The sky turned dusky pink. A loon called somewhere across the water. I used to come here alone, he said. Sit out here and just think. What about everything? Nothing. Sometimes I'd go days without speaking a word. Sounds lonely. It was. But it was mine. Maggie leaned back on her hands. Did you ever want to share it? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, only with someone who didn't want to own it. She understood what he meant. Some things are only beautiful when they're held lightly. As night fell, they curled up on the porch swing under a quilt that smelled like pine and rain. Sebastian told her about his parents, his mother, gentle and practical, who died when he was 23. His father, brilliant but cold, who had expected greatness and measured love and performance. I built everything trying to prove something to him, Sebastian said. And when he passed, I realized he never really saw any of it. Maggie reached for his hand. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded. Me too. Then, without prompting, she shared her own loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from never being asked the kind of questions Sebastian had asked her, from being overlooked again and again, until it felt like a kind of ghosthood. I've never been someone people watch, she said. And now, it feels like I'm under a magnifying glass. Sebastian turned toward her. You don't have to perform for anyone. Not here. I don't know if I remember how to be just myself. You were last night, and the night before. That's what drew me in. She looked up at him, searching for the truth in his expression. What do you see when you look at me? She asked. He answered without hesitation. Peace, and a future I didn't know I needed. Her eyes welled unexpectedly. She blinked hard, trying not to cry. You're ruining me, she whispered. He smiled. No, I'm reminding you. That night, the power flickered out just before midnight. Maggie startled as the lights went out. Did I break something? She asked from under the quilt. Sebastian lit a candle, just the fuse box. It happens. You're sure? He paused. Also, thunder's coming. She raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's a bad thing. I'm not great with storms. Sebastian Cole, tech mogul, terrified of thunder. He chuckled, a bit sheepishly. I'm a complex man. They stayed up, candlelight flickering across the walls, the rain drumming against the roof like a lullaby from the sky. At one point, he sang badly to an old folk song, playing faintly from the radio. Maggie laughed so hard she forgot what it felt like to be watched. And in that little cabin, wrapped in quiet, they weren't CEO and librarian. They weren't public and private, rich and modest. They were just two people, finding their way. The cabin faded into the rearview mirror like a dream. Maggie sat quietly as Sebastian drove south. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it held something neither of them could name. Maybe it was the realization that nothing stays untouched. Even the softest moments must return to harder realities. When they pulled up to her apartment in Charleston, Maggie hesitated before opening the door. Sebastian looked over. Dinner tomorrow. She gave a soft smile. I'd like that. But when she stepped inside, the quiet didn't comfort her the way it used to. Her shelves felt too full, the light too dim. Even her cat, usually a source of solace, blinked at her like she was someone else now. Because maybe she was. The next day, Sebastian met her at a small bistro tucked behind a florist's shop. He was already seated, a candle flickering on the table between them. He stood when she arrived. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "Like someone who just learned something important." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "What if I told you I'm still figuring out what that something is? I'd say you're human." They ordered wine, talked about unimportant things, books, dogs, local construction detours. But eventually, the conversation circled back to what neither of them had said. "There's a gala this Friday," Sebastian said. Maggie tensed. "Gala for childhood literacy. I'm one of the sponsors. I'd like you to come with me." She stared at him. "A gala with cameras?" He nodded. "And very polished, very tall women in designer dresses." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Likely." She pushed her salad around with her fork. "Sebastian, I don't own anything that fits in at a gala. I'll send a stylist. I don't know how to talk to people like that. Talk the way you talk to me." She hesitated. "I don't want to embarrass you." He leaned forward. "You could never embarrass me." She looked at him. "But what if I embarrass me?" Later that night, Maggie called Claire. "I need to borrow your confidence," she said. Claire didn't miss a beat. "You have your own. You just keep hiding it under cardigans and politeness." Maggie laughed. Despite herself, "I don't know if I belong in a room full of people like him." Claire's voice softened. "Then don't go to the room. Go to him. The man who sings off-key and burns garlic." That gave Maggie pause. It reminded her that love isn't about stepping into someone else's world. Sometimes, it's about opening a door into your own. The night of the gala, Maggie stood in front of her mirror, stunned by her reflection. The stylist had arrived with 3 gowns. Maggie had chosen the simplest midnight blue, off the shoulder, elegant but understated. Her hair was pinned back loosely. Her shoes were barely 2 inches high. But she looked like someone who could belong. When Sebastian saw her, he didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "You take my breath away." Maggie looked up at him, nerves fluttering behind her ribs. "Promise you won't leave my side." Wasn't planning on it. The Metropolitan Museum gleamed like a dream, wrapped in crystal and gold. People moved through its grand halls with practiced grace. Waiters passed with silver trays. Camera flashes lit corners of the room. Names Maggie had only read in magazines drifted by in murmurs. Sebastian kept her close. He introduced her, not as a +1, not as a friend, but as Maggie Whitmore. And when people asked what she did, he didn't rush past it or change the subject. He said, with pride, "She runs a library that holds more history than this museum." Some smiled politely. Others looked curious. A few raised eyebrows, but no one dismissed her. Across the room, Victoria Cole stood by the bar, a champagne flute in hand. She caught sight of them and made her way over. Maggie braced herself. "Margaret," Victoria said, extending a hand. "You look lovely." Maggie shook it. "Thank you." "So do you." Victoria gave a tight smile. "You're different from who I expected." "I get that a lot." Victoria's expression softened. "Just slightly." "He's different around you." "How so less polished?" "More like himself." Maggie glanced toward Sebastian, who was laughing with a group of donors. His tie slightly crooked, his hand occasionally touching the small of Maggie's back, just to make sure she was still there. "He doesn't try to impress me," Maggie said, and maybe that's what impresses me most. On the drive home, Sebastian was quiet. What are you thinking? Maggie asked. That I used to believe love was about finding someone who could keep up. And now I think it's about finding someone who reminds you it's okay to slow down. Maggie smiled, resting her head lightly against the window. I'm not fast. I'm not flashy. No, he said. You're steady and kind and real. She turned to face him. But is that enough? It's more than enough, he said, without hesitation. The sun filtered softly through the chapel windows, casting golden lines across the pews like someone had drawn them in with trembling hands. There was no grand orchestra, no paparazzi at the gate, no designer gowns worth 5 digits, just a small gathering. Friends, family, people who mattered. The same chapel where Maggie had once sat alone at table 14, quietly folding the edges of her napkin, now held a different memory. Today, she wasn't seated at the back. Today, she was walking down the aisle. Her dress was simple ivory, soft neckline, sleeves of lace like the ones her mother once wore in a photo Maggie kept near her bed. Her steps were steady, not rushed, not afraid. At the end of the aisle, Sebastian stood waiting. Not the billionaire CEO, not the man from magazine covers, just Sebastian. The man who learned to burn garlic, who feared thunder, who listened like her words mattered. The man who never tried to fix her, just sat with her in her silences. As she reached him, he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. You're here. She smiled. I always was. They turned to face the officiant, hands clasped. No one needed a fairy tale script. Theirs had been written in quiet moments on porches, in small cafes, between shelves of old books and late-night drives. At the reception, Maggie noticed it. That chair, in the very back corner, the one that had once made her feel like she didn't belong. Only now, it held a small card with elegant handwriting, reserved for those who felt unseen. Today, you are. She stood there for a moment, the sounds of laughter and soft music behind her, her hand gently resting on the chair. Then, she turned back to Sebastian, her husband, who was laughing with Claire and Victoria, his tie already slightly loosened. And she realized the life she had once watched from the sidelines. She was living it now, not because she became someone else, but because someone finally saw who she really was and stayed. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in life don't happen on grand stages. They begin in quiet corners, at forgotten tables, beside someone who finally looks at us and truly sees us. Maggie's story reminds us that it's never too late to be noticed, and never too late to choose ourselves. She didn't change to fit someone else's world instead. Her quiet strength invited someone to meet her where she was. In a time when many feel invisible in family gatherings, busy cities, or even within their own lives, this story is a gentle call. You matter. Your story still matters. And someone, somewhere, may be waiting to pull out a chair beside you, not because you're impressive, but because you're real. Let love, in all its forms, find you in your truest state. Not the polished version, not the younger version, just you as you are. Today, because sometimes the life we've been waiting for begins the moment we stop trying to earn it and simply let it in. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, made you reflect, or simply reminded you that we all deserve to be seen. We'd be so grateful if you gave it a like, shared it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. Every view, every comment, every connection keeps this little corner of light shining. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself and remember, your story matters.